Losing someone is hard enough. Figuring out everything they left behind makes it harder. Today, I talk with estate administration expert Mollie Lacher about the countless practical decisions families face after a death, and why even seemingly simple tasks like transferring utilities or accessing an online account aren't always simple. If you've ever worried you might leave a mess for your loved ones or become the person responsible for cleaning up someone else's mess, you won't want to miss this conversation. I'm Jill Mastroianni, an estate planning attorney and host of the Death Readiness podcast. Recently, I've been working on something exciting. I started a new law firm, Mastroianni Legacy Law, which will be my client-facing estate planning and probate practice. Now, creating a law firm isn't as simple as filing paperwork and hanging out a shingle. Although, to be fair, I did immediately order hooded sweatshirts with the new logo for my family. So we're prepared for either organic marketing or our Christmas card, whichever comes first. One of the less glamorous tasks was getting malpractice insurance. When I started practicing law again earlier this year, I asked another attorney for a recommendation, and she referred me to her insurance agent. Unfortunately, the experience was not great. The agent was generally unresponsive, and when she did respond, she kept making mistakes. When it came time to set up insurance for Mastroianni Legacy Law, I thought I'll just call the insurance company directly. But they told me I had to go through my insurance agent. I actually told the representative, but my insurance agent is terrible. That didn't change the answer. So I found myself right back where I started, emailing that same terrible insurance agent because I just wanted to check one more thing off my list. Then I caught myself. I thought, Jill, why are you rewarding someone for doing a poor job simply because you're anxious to get this finished? So I stopped, and I'm working with a different insurance company, one that I can interface with directly without needing an agent. I've been thinking about that experience because it's more than just insurance. Whether you're looking for an estate planning attorney, a contractor, a financial advisor, or someone to help after the death of a loved one, it's incredibly easy to settle for the first person you find simply because you're overwhelmed and you need help. But when you're grieving, the quality of the professional you choose matters even more. That's why I'm so excited to do another episode with Mollie Lacher. I'll link to my previous episode with Mollie Lacher in the show notes because it was a great conversation. Mollie and her team at Sunny Care Services serve as executor and executor support for probate estates throughout Tennessee. I have worked alongside Mollie for years, and I genuinely wish everyone had someone like Mollie in their corner after losing a loved one. She's knowledgeable, compassionate, incredibly organized, and she helps families navigate an otherwise very overwhelming process. Of course, not everyone lives in Tennessee. That's why I'm especially excited about what we're discussing today. Mollie recently created a course called What to Do After Losing a Loved One. After someone dies, suddenly there are bank accounts to close, insurance companies to call, property to manage, digital accounts to access or not access, tax issues to consider, probate questions to answer, and lots of decisions that no one prepared you to make. Most people are handed a death certificate. What they really need is a roadmap, and that's exactly where Mollie comes in. Whether you've recently lost someone, you're currently serving as an executor, or you simply want to be better prepared for the future, I think you're going to find today's conversation incredibly practical. Let's get started. Hi, Mollie. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jill.
So I want to just start right out with the question that a lot of people have is, when we experience a loss, what's kind of the first thing that we need to be thinking about?
Keeping the lights on feels really important. So meaning when there's a house involved and maybe that person that passed is the last surviving person that had lived in that. So this house is now vacant. There's a lot that we need to kind of jump in and do. So starting with just perishables, getting those out of there. If you've ever walked in a house where food has been left for weeks, months even, it makes a situation that is bad so much worse. But then securing valuables, changing out the locks so nobody can access the home, making sure utilities are kept up, homeowners insurance, and also letting them know that now the house is vacant. These are the things that I really focus on.
And what happens when a house is vacant? Is that going to change the homeowner's insurance? Is it going to change the amount you have to pay?
It can. It has in my experience, 50% of the time. Sometimes you work with the local agent and there is no change. And I don't ask too many questions when that happens. But uh, majority of the time, yes, they mark the home as vacant. And so then it is a higher monthly amount. But it's more important to me to have that marked as vacant than to not, and there be something that would happen in the home.
And then there's a possibility that the insurer could deny coverage because they were not informed that the home was vacant.
Exactly.
So if you're talking about securing the home or even starting with the refrigerator, right, as to what might be left in there, I would
Mhm.
imagine that's not the first thing your clients are asking about. What are your clients generally worried about versus what you are sort of taking on as the first action items?
I see a lot of my clients really want to jump in head first to a lot of the heavy financial items. And I understand that access to cash is a very big deal, and making sure that, especially if it's a surviving spouse, that they do have access to their bank accounts to continue to pay bills. Those are big. But then also just really wanting to pay bills that are coming forward and making sure that they don't get calls from debt collectors. People get very stressed about financial matters. And that's where I think things can start to get um, pretty tangled up. In that, if you don't take a pause to assess the situation before you start acting on these things, you can make some, you know, permanent mistakes that can cost you being locked out of accounts or just not having access to funds when you need it and whatnot.
So when someone is saying that they just need to pay these debts or get access to these financial accounts, it feels really urgent, right? It feels really urgent to the people you're working with. But are you saying that maybe the best route is to take a breath and wait a bit? And what exactly are you waiting for? What kinds of cues do you need to move forward?
so in the course that we're going to talk about, what I really recommend is let's get our arms around everything first. So let's make sure that we understand what accounts are out there and what they're paying for, how they're titled. And then let's also meet with an estate attorney to talk about next steps for this. So it's really gathering all of the information, talking with an attorney, and then making an educated decision based on that information first before you just start closing things out.
Right. So you would be more in the information gathering stage regarding the finances. What accounts did the decedent have? How were they titled? Were they jointly owned
Mhm.
or individually owned? And maybe was there a designated beneficiary or not? And then you're not an attorney. So you're then taking all of that information to the estate attorney with the client and saying, okay, now what do you want us to do with this information? And it sounds like even collecting bills, not paying them, but collecting those bills is part of the information that you are bringing to the estate attorney.
Exactly.
So let's just take a step back for a second because there's a lot of things that you talk about in your course about being an investigator that would be above and in addition to financial accounts and figuring out the titling and bills and things like that. What else are you looking for when you're gathering information after somebody has died?
Really, anything that would be indicative of an asset. So, an asset meaning it could be property, it could be meaning real property. So, like maybe they have land in Michigan they didn't know about.
What would be a clue, though? How would you even know to look for something like real property? What sort of information might be visible to you that would
Mhm.
lead you to believe, oh, there's something else?
When I am looking through documents, I am looking for property tax records, I'm looking
Okay.
for statements, I'm looking for Like for instance, if you see a mailing from Merrill Lynch from 2013 that was addressed to that decedent, the person who passed, I'm calling Merrill Lynch because that to me is what I'm referring to as a potential breadcrumb that could lead you to an asset, and actually did for a most recent estate that I was working on. No one knew about this account with Merrill Lynch. I saw a very, very old statement that had been mailed to the person who passed, and just on a whim wanted to call just to make sure no stone was left unturned. And sure enough, there's $150,000 in investments.
A $150,000 breadcrumb. That's pretty good.
Yes, that was not on tax records, mind you. So tax returns are also a big one that I'm looking for. So any, 1099s or any, K1s, anything that would indicate that there's money somewhere that's been trickled down to the person who's passed, that they've paid interest or they've received dividends from, that would appear on your tax return most of the time. But that's also assuming that the decedent, the person who passed, actually was claiming it properly.
Right. So you never know about that.
You never know.
And what else might you be looking for to figure out sort of what kind of recurring charges there might be, and what might recurring charges reveal for someone who has recently had somebody pass away?
Sure. So when we are working with the family after that lost loved one has passed, requesting bank statements and credit card statements from the last year, not the past month, not the past 6 months. I really like to go back a full year because, there's always those sneaky subscriptions that only hit once a year that nobody remembered or cared about. And so we want to look into that. But for instance, something that might be indicative of a helpful hint or breadcrumb is I was trying to figure out one gentleman's who was filing his taxes for him and couldn't find the name of an accountant anywhere, but I kept seeing a recurring charge for H&R Block. So that was an indication that he had been using them for his tax filings. And so I needed to further search in that area. It kind of helps guide you to where the information might live.
Right. Exactly. So right now we're talking about information that everybody needs to be looking for and find in whatever accessible way they can. What about estate planning documents? What are you looking for there, and what are you seeing with people having estate plans versus not having estate plans? Is there something that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I say estate planning documents are so critical and so important. And it always depends on the attorney who's drafting in terms of how much detail they're putting in. But it does give us the high points, right? It shows us who are the important people that need to be in the loop. It shows us maybe where large pieces of property are and specific requests, meaning, like specific items or amounts that need to go to specific people. And so that's very important. That gives us direction. But more often than not, I don't find that estate planning documents contain more of the day-to-day information, like where did this person bank? Where is their life insurance policy? How did they pay their mortgage and utilities? And so that's where you kind of get a little bit more stuck and need to do investigative work, or maybe they've been, planning for this and they've organized their information together, maybe with a state organization, that service line that we talked about, or just doing it on their own, but putting that information somewhere else so that you can blend the two together. Because you do need your estate planning documents, but you also need all of the other day-to-day life information.
What you're saying is it's not as if somebody could feel that, they've got everything buttoned up because they've gotten a will drafted or they've had a trust drafted. Those documents are separate and necessary often, but in addition to all this other information that you're tracking down, which it could be really great if somebody went ahead and got that information together ahead of time. So the search isn't so much a scavenger hunt. It's more just looking through well-filed documents.
Absolutely, because when we are collecting all of this information to bring to the estate attorney and say, what next? They need to know what assets the person who passed had when they died. So the attorney likely doesn't know all of that, especially if, let's say, you went and worked with this attorney 10 years ago, 20 years
Hmm.
ago. They knew a snapshot in time, but they didn't know what current day was in terms of what you owned and what you owed. And so that's a lot of what I'm trying to help, and what this course kind of helps you navigate is, how do I get all of this information together so the estate attorney can actually give us direction on what needs to happen, because you can't rely just on the estate planning documents alone.
So when you're trying to get information or perhaps notify the the government or whoever needs to be notified about somebody's death or get information about accounts, one of the things that I think is really difficult for someone going through this for the first time and dealing with a loss is to figure out, how do you even know what to say when you pick up the phone. So how do you help people with that next step?
So in the course, we actually provide um, scripts and templates for what to say, because it is hard to know what are the words that resonate with the person on the
Right.
other end of the line. And so we give you some kind of guideposts to walk through those conversations, because sometimes it is such a task to get to the right department, even to talk to the right person who can help you. And so we walk you through, how do you kind of make sure that you're talking with the estates department predominantly a lot of
Right.
times, and then talking with someone who actually understands estates. That's your next step, because sometimes even in the estates department, they will not understand what documents they need in order to talk to you or disclose information. They may have a misunderstanding about who you are in relationship to the person who passed. So we try to give you as much of the guardrails in place to have a meaningful and productive conversation with customer service.
So that you sort of have a bit of the power on your side. You know what you're doing, you know which documents are going to be needed, and then you can sort of guide the conversation based on the script that you've
Exactly.
provided. And I
Exactly.
know that talking with customer service, that can be so difficult in any kind of realm of life, but especially when you're dealing with a loss. And one of the things that you said in your course is that it's the kind of the small tasks that can really take you down versus the big legal tasks of probate or something like that. And what kind of small tasks are you talking about that can really be overwhelming and arduous?
Utilities honestly can be the number one offender of this. I tend to think internet and cable providers, I won't list names, but they tend to be the hardest people for us to work with, because you can tell immediately when a company doesn't have a clear process for this, which is wild to me, because death happens every day. And yet some of these organizations don't seem to have a clear protocol for, one person on the account has passed, we need to move it into the name of the other person or take that person off, without making it a huge Herculean task. So unfortunately, I feel like utilities, getting names off of utilities, switching them over to another person's name, seems to be unnecessarily difficult, I've found.
And I think that sometimes you even need more than you would know. Just in one circumstance, you and I were working with a utility company, and you had on numerous occasions notified them that the owner was deceased and there was a different person living in the home. And the person living in the home kept getting notifications that this utility would be shut off. Finally, it was shut off despite all of your attempts to notify the company. And then we had to actually work through the general counsel for the utility provider in order to get the utility turned back on. So that's an extreme example, but that can just show you how frustrating that situation can be. And sometimes it is really helpful to be working with someone, like yourself, who has gone through these frustrations before and can say, okay, all right, this is what we're going to do next, versus, okay, you're sitting there by yourself and it's the 10th time you've tried to get your utilities transferred and nobody's listening. how do you move on from there? I think that's it's good to have somebody in your corner when you're dealing with that.
Sure. I mean, well, and it even just goes to show Jill and I both, who do this every day, couldn't even figure out that one utility and had to get general counsel involved. That is how crazy and outrageous sometimes these companies can be. And yeah, exactly. Imagine if you were on your own trying to navigate that. That's what I mean by the small things like utilities. You think this is going to be an easy lift and shift that eventually takes you down. And I think maybe that's part of it too, is you think it will be simple because it is just a utility and not a financial account with $500,000 behind it. This should be just, I'm changing over my gas bill. And I think that's where people get really caught off guard, is thinking, oh, I thought this was going to be the easy thing, and it's not.
Okay, so now that we've talked sort of about the physical, tangible things in a deceased person's life that's been left behind, let's shift over to the digital legacy that somebody might leave, I guess known as a digital footprint. And what are you seeing there, and what can you do as the surviving person to help make sure that stuff gets locked down?
What I would say is that first, you of course need to talk with your attorney. I talk about this so much in the course, but your attorney is really going to give you guidance on what should be these next steps and what do you have the ability from a legal perspective to do. So digital life is obviously so important. We live so much of our lives online, and we leave things like pictures and documents and all sorts of assets online. And the hope is, of course, that that person that passed named you as a digital beneficiary either on Apple or on Google, yep, inactive account manager. There are Facebook has one, which, is not going to obviously give you a lot of keys to a lot of kingdoms, but Google and Apple certainly would. And then that gives you the best ability to access the information you want to access on behalf of the person who's passed.
And I'm going to actually link in the show notes to information on how you can set up those inactive account managers, the legacy contacts that Mollie was just talking about, if you want to go ahead and set those up on your own.
My favorite party trick is to do that in social settings, because I'm that person, but I love to say, pull up your phone. Let's do this right now, because it is that simple. But let's say that the person who passed didn't do that for you. You obviously need to talk with an attorney to see what you have access to. And as we talk about in the course, there are so many risks involved with attempting to log in on behalf.
Yes, let's get into that. Attempting. What can happen if you attempt too many times to access your decedent's phone or laptop or iPad? What happens?
I see this all the time with my clients, and they get locked out permanently. Or, some systems are set up where it'll lock it down for a week or 30 days, and then you can try again. But if you really aren't given the proper credentials, then you are kind of stuck, and then you are locked out permanently from these accounts. And so if you reach out to these organizations directly, so we have a client right now talking about Apple and wanting to access an Apple account, and Google the same. If they see that you've attempted to log in on behalf of the person who's passed and you weren't the named beneficiary and you were just trying to do this on your own without the proper channels, they can also keep you out indefinitely.
Right.
So there are real ramifications for this, which is why we just say, you need to proceed with caution and know what are the risks involved, because we understand there's so much out there from a digital perspective. And that's why we harp so much on getting it set up in the first place. But if you can't, then you need to chat with your attorney, and then hopefully they can give you guidance on what they feel comfortable with you doing.
Okay. And then do we need to be worried about identity theft after death?
I think yes. And so a big thing that I like to do is really lock down that individual's identity when they pass, because unfortunately there are nefarious people out there who are looking through obituaries to see, accounts that likely don't have eyes on them a lot, right? And so, or socials that don't have eyes on them a lot.
So when you say lock down, what do you mean?
Well, one thing that we really like to do is we like to notify the credit reporting institutions. So that's Experian, Equifax, TransUnion. And what that does is we let them know that this person's passed. And then that means that nobody could take out future loans in that individual's social.
Okay.
So we think that's an important part of it. And then, shutting down eventually things like emails, and other accounts that especially have financial information associated with them, maybe a credit card that's not shut down yet, or linked to bank accounts. Certainly, we want to make sure that those accounts get permanently deleted or shut down because you never know who's going to be hacking in or attempting to hack. And if, let's say, somebody does somehow find access to a bank login and nobody's monitoring that decedent's email, because sometimes you can't,
Right.
then they're not seeing all of these emails that are sending, typically that are saying, hey, somebody's attempted to log into your account. Is this you? And blocking that. So it can get out of hand really quickly, which is why we say, yes, take the time to wrap your arms around what's going on financially and what are these accounts and what's all in this person's name, but then also being very timely about shutting down their life and closing out their life so that you're not leaving just things open and exposed for forever. That could mean to further complications down the road.
So let's talk about the role of executor, administrator, personal representative. It's called different things, but the person who is appointed by the court to be in charge of the probate process. I know that your company, Sunny Care Services, it does serve as executor, but more often we see individuals, maybe a close friend, a sibling, an adult child appointed to serve in the role as executor. What's some advice that you could give to somebody in that role who maybe has no idea what they've stepped into?
Well, one, it is a job. Being executor, administrator, PR is a job, and it actually can be part-time to full-time, honestly, in hours
Hmm.
if you really allow it to, because that's what the job requires. It can be pretty arduous and take up a lot of your time, and so I think people need to be prepared for that. I think people also need to be okay to not know the answers to things. I have so many clients that come to me, and we talk about this in the course too, and they feel ashamed that they don't know what they're supposed to be doing, or they don't know
Hmm.
what these terms are that the attorneys are just spitting at them. And I say, that's a good thing. That means that you hopefully haven't had a lot of loss in your life. And so you shouldn't have to feel ashamed for not knowing what to do next, because it's a very niche experience for people, and hopefully you're only having to serve in this role one or two times max in your life. That does not mean that you're fresh up on what to do and how to do the role. So I think those are kind of my two biggest things. And then don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that a lot of folks think, because I've been named as executor, I want to honor the role. And that means I have to white knuckle it and I have to do it
Hmm.
all myself and figure everything out. And I think maybe the bravest thing that you can do as executor say is, I need help.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. And I have worked with you a lot when your company was serving as executor or as agent to the executor. And the clients who have worked with you as agent to the executor have a much better time because they are still sort of in charge, but they have somebody who's actually helping them out with the administrative tasks and who has done this before
Hmm.
many times. Whereas, like you said, a lot of times someone serving in the role of executor, this might be their first time, maybe their second, hopefully not more than that. So it can, like you said, become a job. And I think that it's often underestimated the amount of work that goes into it. So getting a professional who can help you adequately serve in the role of executor, I think is really helpful.
Hmm.
So, for anybody listening today, what is one thing, one document that you could say would be so helpful if they could make accessible to someone that they love, someone who might be taking care of their estate after they're gone? What might just that one document be?
Initially my thoughts went to a tax return just because when I find the person who's passed and their tax return, it is a treasure trove for me because it immediately shows me where the money was kind of coming and going from a
Right.
large, high level perspective. But in talking to an attorney, I'm realizing you probably want me to say the will or the trust, the originals, Jill. So I'm going to say that too. That's important because, as you have already said in past podcasts, the originals, very important.
The original will is very important. In Tennessee, we do not require an original trust.
There she goes. So that's good to explain that. So I would say original will if that's relevant, but then past that, a tax return is super helpful to know if I had to pick one document.
Okay. Now, having done this work for quite a while, is there anything that you've changed in your own life because of this work?
I would say I have always been this way, but this job has absolutely made me double down on it. And that is trust but verify.
Okay.
When someone says, "Oh, I'm on that account with my husband and I'm certain they put me on there as POD," or "I'm positive that life insurance beneficiary says the trust and not me personally," or whatever that may be, it is looking into that yourself, seeing it with your own two eyes, speaking with the organization directly and saying, is this actually titled this way, beneficiary listed this way, whatever that may be? I don't just take someone's word for it anymore because that's not to say people are intending to be dishonest about it.
Right.
It's that they truly believe that they did that step, but may have gotten, as most of us do, distracted by something else that happened or did submit the paperwork, but it never got accepted and they never knew that. So because I see how much assumptions play into loss and how people just assume they have access to all these things or are beneficiaries on all these things that maybe the person who passed intended to have them listed as.
Right.
That's why I think it's in my own life, I've just started to really make sure if my husband is going out and buying a car that I'm getting on that title, or that if he's opening up a safe deposit box that I actually know how to get access to that. I've become a little bit neurotic in that way because I see how frustrating it can be to have these surprises later on down the road that you weren't at it or didn't get access to that or were locked out.
All right. Well, Molly, tell us about your course. Where can we find it and just a little bit more about it?
Sure. So it's on my website and it is sunnycareservices.com. And at the top of the page, you'll see a big hour course listed on there.
Okay.
And so that you can access that from there and it leads you to our host where you can purchase it.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Molly.
Thanks, Jill. It's fun being here.
As I was thinking about today's conversation, I kept coming back to that insurance story from the beginning of the episode. When I was trying to get my new law practice up and running, it was tempting to keep working with someone who wasn't meeting my needs, simply because I was overwhelmed and I wanted to check one more thing off my list. After a loss, that temptation is even greater. You're grieving, you're exhausted, and you're making decisions you've never had to make before. That's exactly when having the right people in your corner matters most. One of my favorite things Molly said today is that being an executor is a job. And for most people, it's a job they're doing for the very first time. You're not supposed to know how to secure a vacant house, determine whether probate is necessary, notify the credit bureaus, or figure out whether you should be logging into someone's Apple account or not. In fact, sometimes trying to do the obvious thing can actually create bigger problems. If you're listening because you've recently lost someone, I hope today's conversation reminds you that it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to white knuckle your way through this on your own. And if you're listening because you're planning ahead, remember this. One of the greatest gifts you can leave your family isn't just a will or a trust. It's organization and clear information. I will link to information on Mollie's estate organization service in the show notes. You'll also find a link to Mollie's course, What to Do After Losing a Loved One, in the show notes, along with the links to the resources we mentioned today, including how to set up legacy contacts with Apple and Google's Inactive Account Manager. Thanks for listening today.